Hello and welcome to the Now Spinning Magazine podcast with me, Phil Aston. And this, you could say, is an extension of the Meet the Collector series. Pat Renau is someone who's interacted on the channel quite a few times, especially when I talk about Black Sabbath. And we're going to find out exactly why that is. Pat is someone who had access to the band, being able to go to many of the gigs in the 70s, especially the Sabotage and Technical Ecstasy, Never Say Die tour, and has actually built up such a collection of memorabilia that Tony Iommi is interested in actually having photographs and finding out more about this. So welcome, Pat. Thank you so much for joining me today.
It's a pleasure, and I have looked forward to this more one-on-one communication for over a year now. So thanks, Phil.
Yeah, it's been a long time, but you've been sending some fascinating stuff through to me. So, Pat, for everyone who's watching and listening, let's start at the beginning. When did you first become a Black Sabbath fan?
Well, the beginning is probably similar to the beginning of a lot of us who are in our age range, who went through that late 60s, 70s change that was happening in music. I mean, a change that I don't think will ever happen again. But my story becomes more, I think, takes quite a turn on July 26, 1975. But before that date, 15 years old in 1970 and what was coming out in that year, you can imagine, I think 15 is what the most rebellious age for a teenage boy. You can probably relate.
Yeah.
And so it was a perfect storm. Even earlier when I was 8, 9, 10 years old, I couldn't go to sleep at night without the radio on next to my bed. The top 40 here in the States, whatever the hit singles were. Beach Boys, Beatles, Herman Hermits, whatever that was, the list.
Yeah.
So when you were 8 years old, were you listening to the radio as you were falling asleep?
I was, under a tiny little transistor radio about that big under the pillow, yeah.
And my parents would sneak in and turn it off when they knew I was. And so that went on for years. And then 1968 was the first awakening, I could say. I went to visit a cousin. He was the first immediate family member and only who had really long hair and a beard, and he was into everything. He was ahead of the game. He was hip, and he, Blue Cheer, Cream. He said, "Hey, Pat, Beach Boys, come here. I want you to listen to a song." But the song's 17 minutes long, and I went, "Wow. Let's listen to this one." And it was In-A-Gadda Da Vida.
Oh, yeah, I'm Butterfly.
At 13 years old, listening to that after the top 40 and that 3-minute drum solo, which, no, it wasn't Neil Peart, but the consistent rhythm and the production of that solo. Well, I had to be a drummer, right, after that. And so I would scrounge around the neighborhood trying to come up with some income. And I bought my first snare drum and hi-hat and added on after that. So my first rock concert was Iron Butterfly, 1970, James Gang with Joe Walsh, Blues Image. But by 1970, even the Iron Butterfly was, I don't want to sound harsh, but obsolete, with what was coming in. And I had befriended a boy my age at church, actually. I was still going to Baptist church here at the behest of my parents, at the great behest of my parents. And he was the pastor's son.
Yeah.
And he said, "Listen, by that time, it wasn't AM radio, it was FM. And underground music."
Yeah.
And he used to come over. "I got to play you some albums." So I go over to his house. He's got warning signs on his bedroom door not to enter. And you go in, it is dark. There's some black light stuff going on over here. And he plays me Black Sabbath's first album, Uriah Heep's first album, and Deep Purple in rock.
Wow.
Straight through, right through. And my impression was Sabbath, the overall sound, unheard of, never heard before. It
Yeah.
was more the sound. Uriah Heep, Gypsy Bird of Prey, first time hearing that in 1970, stunning.
Yeah.
How could that even be done?
Yeah. Yeah.
And Deep Purple in rock, we all know Ritchie's Child in Time solo is still my favorite 55 years later. And I'll try not to talk about Blackmore during this one, but our paths do cross a few times. So Paranoid comes out in the same year. And both their first two albums, I had already become attached to how Ozzy sang, but it wasn't until Master of Reality that I went off the deep end. The lyrics were there to take this very appealing vocal meter that Ozzy had and attach lyrics to it now, new dimension. And Master of Reality that made them just my favorite band. I was still diverse. I was listening to Focus and, many other bands, but that was it. So I saw them in their Master of Reality tour, March 72.
Yeah.
So I'm 17 now, and I was living in Jacksonville, Florida, and I get pretty close to the stage, 20, 25 feet, and I have a little cheap black and white camera, and I took 14 photographs. And to jump wildly ahead, one of those photos is on their website right now.
Wow.
And why it's there is the rest of my story, I suppose. So Volume 4 is next. I get it on the day it's released at the downtown record store that always gets things early. And I listened through it, and then at Snowblind, I think I listened to Snowblind 11 times in a row before I could finish the album.
Wow.
Volume 4 just cemented everything that I was feeling with this band. And then Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, just they shot to their pinnacle. And I mean, Spiral Architect, I just couldn't believe I've gone from 1970 to Spiral Architect in 5 years. And or 4 years.
Yeah.
So, by then you're 18, 19, 20 years old. And over here, my friends were starting to go to university, and, it's like time to grow up. You have to get a job and a career. And I thought, I kind of got wrapped up in that same mentality. But Sabotage had just come out, and I looked at their tour venue, and I was, again, living in North Florida.
Yeah.
And they had some dates, 2 north of me and 2 south of me. And I decided, before I pack it in and grow up, I wanted to meet these musicians, especially Ozzy, and just thank them for getting me through my teenage years. Inspiration, and show them how much I appreciated their band. And I kind of thought, the first show was in Atlanta, Georgia, which was a 6-hour drive.
Wow.
From where I lived. And I know you can get to Scotland over there driving 6 hours. So,
that's a long way. It's a long way.
I know it's a long way, but I drove up there, saw the first show, drove back home, grabbed a buddy of mine who wasn't particularly their favorite, or he was into other things. He was just along for the ride. And I said, look, I'm gonna meet them in Savannah, Georgia. Savannah is the size of a city where it's small enough where there would be one main hotel downtown. So I knew that they would be there. And I had brought with me some photographs that I took from the Sabbath Bloody Sabbath tour and that first 72 tour. And I was going to give them to Ozzy. I blew them up into 8x10s. So I go to the front desk, and walked right up very casually and just said, "What room is John Osbourne in?" Thinking I was going to get some resistance, like, "Who
Yeah,
are
yeah, yeah.
you?" But they looked down, a little typing, 1303. They just told me. I said,
Wow.
"Thank you very much." And I kept remembering 1303 in my head. I can't forget that number. So
Yeah.
myself, buddy Jack, we go up the elevator to the 13th floor, knock on the door. I have no idea where could go,
Yeah.
and no answer. So I told my buddy, go down to the lobby, start watching to see where he may be, and I will guard the door, which I
Yeah.
did. And a couple of blokes with your accent come walking down the hall, and I think, they're with the band. So I said, "Hey, do you know where Ozzy is?" And they said, "Yeah, he's down in the cafe." And so I'm going down the elevator. I go across the lobby and I look in the cafe, and it's very narrow, one row of booths, and I can see the back of Ozzy's head. And he's sitting with his assistant, whose name was Frank Silvani, or
Yeah.
at least that were. And he would just make sure Ozzy got to the show okay, and
Yeah. Yeah.
those. So not sure what I was going to say, but I walk up to the booth, and it just popped in my head. I just said, "Ozzy, I've waited 5 long years to meet you." And he stuck out his hand before I did mine. He was incredibly polite. He was not the devil that I had read about in all the print magazines,
Yeah.
and I had read all of them. And as you know, there's no
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
internet, so you read everything in the few magazines that there's available. Very polite, and of course, my friend who was with me, he comes in right after that, and "Oh, Ozzy," some kind of very
Yeah. Yeah.
embarrassing. This is over before it's even done. And some band members in the a couple of booths down, they shout out, "Oh, Ozzy,"
Yeah.
chiming
Yeah. Yeah.
in. But it was cool. Ozzy invited us to sit in with them for lunch. They were kind of finished, and I showed him the photos that I had taken. I gave them to him, and since they were done and we didn't want, they offered and we didn't want anything. He said, "Well, we're going up to the hotel room to get ready for the show. You want to come up?"
Wow.
And yeah, of course, yes, of course. So here's the four of us going back up the same elevator to the 1303. And Phil, I had a little habit of little mini cassette recorder, and I would
Yeah.
record certain things. I was a bit of a practical joker or something, but I had that with me. And, it was hot. It was July. So I don't think I had it hidden in a jacket, but it was in my hand. And when
Yeah.
we went into that room, I think I left it on the table and turned it on. And I have about 45 minutes of what happened in that room in the conversation.
Yeah.
And Ozzy got on his bed, kept his boots on. I gave him the program, Sabotage program from the night before. He
Yeah.
starts flipping through it like he'd never seen it before. And
Yeah.
he signed Ozzy, thanks, Pat, signed his name and doodled around in it. So I started asking him questions, and I didn't want it to sound like an interview.
Yeah. Yeah.
About his family, like,
Mhm.
how's Thelma, the kids doing, when you're on the
Yeah.
road.
Yeah.
And then I asked him how long he thought Black Sabbath was going to stay together. Now, this is July 75. Sabotage had just been coming out.
Yeah.
And he said he didn't know, and this is the mic drop that I thought at the time. He said he didn't know, but he was sure of one thing, that he would have his own solo career. And
Wow.
that, quote, "I already have the name for it, the Blizzard of Oz."
Wow. Back then he had that.
In July 75. And he had a couple of songs that were going to possibly go on a solo album,
Yeah.
but there
Yeah.
was never any talk of a solo band for him, not that I was aware of, and I had read everything. So I thought that was a bit of a breaking news
Yeah.
thing.
Definitely.
And we kept talking like this, and I said, "Hey, how could I get in touch with you?" And he wrote on an index card his address and phone number in Renton, Bulrush Cottage in Renton is where he was living at the time.
Yeah, yeah.
And I thought, wow, that's how much better is this going to get? And I didn't know at that time how much it was going to get better. And then then he goes. We decided to take some photographs, which are in this book here, along with many others. And before the photo session started, he wanted to get some marijuana, take a hit of pot, a pipe, and you could hear on the videotape Frank, his assistant, saying, "Hey, Oz, you're not supposed to be doing that in the hotel." Those kind of chatter. And so we all take photos, and then it was kind of like he wanted to go down for a swim. It was kind of ready to say goodbye, and I said, "Well, I'm going to your next show in South Florida." And they were like, "Really?" They thought this might have been a one-off. I said, "Oh, yeah, I'd like to go down there." And so Frank, knowing Ozzy had kind of blessed the meeting, says, "Well, if you're down there, Lakeland, Florida, tomorrow night, we'll take care of you," is what he said. And I said, "I'll see you then." So the next day, I drive to Lakeland, which is 3 hours south of my home. My friend doesn't even go, so I'm by myself.
Yeah, yeah.
In my first car, I'm 19 years old, and I go to the Holiday Inn where they're staying, go to the front desk. They said, "They're not here yet. They're doing sound check at the Lakeland Civic Center." So I'm going to drive to the Lakeland Civic Center. I drive out of the hotel parking lot, and I get in a car accident there.
Yeah.
Totals the car. I'm not injured. I'm kind of thrown into the floorboard. And I get out. The police arrive. There's a traffic jam. And I'm out standing with the police. And here come a little procession of limousines coming around the traffic. And the windows are rolled down. And there's the band looking out at me. And they remember me from meeting Ozzy the night before.
Yeah.
And they go to the hotel. I walk back to the hotel with no transportation. And I see Ozzy and Frank entering their room. And so I go up to and ask if I can call home in their hotel room. And it's a Holiday Inn. It's not a big complex. So I'm in there, and they step out onto the balcony while I'm inside calling my mom to say, "I've got good news and bad news. I've wrecked my car, but I'm telling you about it from Ozzy's hotel room. I just can't get ahead." So I didn't have a way to the show that night. And so Frank said, "Maybe you can get in with the limos."
Yeah.
And so I go back to the hotel. I try to scramble a few dollars together to get some food. And I walk into the dining room. In the first round table, there's Terry Butler, Bill Ward, and a couple of the roadies sitting there. And they recognize me right away. And Terry says, "Well, that's what you get for following us around." And they all kind of laugh, and they invite me for a meal. So I go back. We get back ready for the show. And there's not enough room in the limos. So they said, "But you can ride with a reporter from Cream Magazine who's come up from Tampa, Florida." And so here I am riding with this guy in a little VW Bug. So from a limo to a VW Bug was quite a adjustment. And he thinks I'm with the band, and he's asking a lot of questions. Like, how do you know them? Is there a lot of drug use? Tell me about the partying. And I was very low key and, didn't spill out a bunch of information. And so we get to the venue, and I think I'm just going to get a pass and hang around the side of the stage while they play. All area access, laminated pass. I could go wherever I wanted, whenever I wanted. And so Peter Frampton was the opening act. A lot of big bands opened for Sabbath before they were big and then became big.
Yeah.
And his live album was months away from being, biggest. And so after Frampton was done, the house lights were up, And I was just walking around, ambling around the stage while they were setting up, and there was Ozzy's microphone, and I knew, his stance. And I got right to the microphone and I put my hand there and I looked out. And with the house lights up, 20,000 people, it's just a sea of, it looked like everybody was looking at you.
Yeah.
I remembered my first concert that I went to when I was 20 feet back in that crowd. And now I was looking back and I just thought, wow, how did I get from there to here? So the show starts and I'm positioned to stage right or Ozzy's left as he's singing, right behind the PA. And Frank, his assistant, is doing this concoction of purified water, orange juice, and honey that he keeps in a jug, in a cup. Ozzy comes over to drink, keep his throat. And after 2 or 3 songs, I notice Frank has left and his cup's empty. So I just impulsively jump up and I do the mix and I fill it up. And right on cue, Ozzy comes over for a drink, which of course I had to take a photo of because I figured none of my friends were going to believe this. And then I noticed Frank over and he's going to let me do this through the whole concert. They're just going to stay over there and let me be Ozzy's water boy.
Wow.
A few songs later, water in the face. Tony Iommi has a squirt gun and he's attacking me between songs. Somebody throws me a squirt gun and I'm going back at him. And here I am, 20 years old, in the middle of a Black Sabbath concert, having a squirt gun fight with Tony Iommi. So here's where things really take the turn that solidifies my legacy with the band for that time period. After the show, I start walking down behind the stage, and an older man starts walking up toward me, and he stops me with his hand. And he's in his late 30s, I think, maybe.
Yeah.
And he says, "Hey, are you the guy that's been following the band since Chicago?" And I corrected him. I said, "No," and I gave him what I was doing. He goes, "Look, come by my room after the show. I'd like to talk to you about your interest in the band." His name was Mark Forster.
Yeah.
He was the tour director. Even though he was an associate with Patrick Meehan early in the 70s, after Meehan left because of some bad relationships there, Mark was respectable and he was highly respected in the industry, and he became their coordinator. He's just he's signified as their coordination for Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. Then he became the tour director, the personnel director. And that's who he was. And I went to his room after the show thinking, well, it's going to be 5 minutes. I'm going to tell him, I'm just telling you in a condensed form. Maybe he'll put me on a mailing list and I'll get some flyer, but that's not what happened. So it was 2 hours in his room telling him about my youth and what the band meant to me. And so the next day, my mother drives down to pick me up and the band's leaving. And I called Ozzy the next day in West Palm Beach. It was so easy to get through in those days. A week later, Mark calls me from New York just to see how I'm doing. And that's when he said the same words that Frank Sylvani said. He said, "Look, on the next tour, you get to as many shows as you can, and we'll take care of you."
Wow.
And that's where things started to kick off. So a long answer to your question, but
no, it's brilliant. So we're now entering 76 then, aren't we, I guess, for the Technical Ecstasy tour. So is that the tour where you decided you were going to go to as many gigs as you possibly could?
Yeah, and it was mainly limited to the Southeast U.S.
Of course,
Alabama, Atlanta, Nashville, Tennessee, Columbia, South. So, there's 7, 8 probably good cities that they would hit in the Southeast U.S.
Uh,
And that's what I would do. I would drive to the show, meet Mark at the hotel where they were at.
yeah.
They would get me a room, dinner, and that that all area access pass was the crown jewel, I suppose. And I would always get set at the same place, to Ozzy's left, and and the photographs kept
I'm going to
accumulating.
yeah, because this must have given
Stories
you
kept.
this
Yep.
must have given you unprecedented access to taking photographs of the band from.
And that's what I have here in the memorabilia book. And I wish I had had either a better camera or I was more photographically inclined. But there's still a moment in time that is pretty important. And there are still really good pictures that I think National Geographic photographers, they take hundreds of pictures to get the one or two
Yeah, that's right.
um, and there were things that would happen, like when they played my hometown, I kind of knew the highways coming out of between the arena where they played and where they were going to go stay. And I had a black Monte Carlo, 1978 black Monte Carlo that kind of fit in really well with the limo. They had
Yeah,
two or three limos. So I would come out with them. I would tail the limos. And in one particular time, there was some threatening people in a car that was coming up and yelling at the band. And you never knew if it was, out of hatred or love, but it did seem
yeah,
dangerous. And I would, at this particular moment, I steered in to force them onto a way that the band was going to exit, and kind of possibly saved a little bit of problems there in
yeah.
that particular. Um, so Technical Ecstasy Tour, it was a good tour, and that album, it was a change. To me, Sabotage was possibly the greatest hard rock album that has ever been made, in my opinion.
Hmm.
Top three at least. And Technical Ecstasy was more experimental, and I still loved it because I was still
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
completely immersed in
Hmm.
the experience. Um, and then, but it was getting to the close to the point where it was advertised that Ozzy had quickly, a couple of times, left the band. And Mark, I have a letter from in 1978, January, where Mark said that it was fixed for Ozzy to rejoin the band to kind of calm any
Yeah,
worries that I had. Um, and they invited me to Toronto, where they recorded Never Say Die. But I was still young and broke, and I couldn't quite make it there, or to the London invites that Mark had invited me to. So I was just hanging on, and but I had that connection with Mark Forster. It was becoming a strong friendship where he would arrive into a city. I would pick him up at the airport. I mean, we
wow.
became really close friends. And Mark, no, people at his level of management, they all knew the other band managers. And Mark knew Bob Adcock, who was managing Rainbow at the time.
Yeah,
And he knew that I had this fondness for Blackmore. Uh, I would try not to speak a lot about it, but Mark knew. And he said, look, if Rainbow's on tour, try to tell Bob Adcock, drop my name, and he'll set you up. And that's exactly what I did. And that's all you needed to do was say, I'm a friend of Mark Forster.
and
And
it opened doors.
Bob just said, it opened up another door. And so this was a 78 tour. And that's when I got to meet Ritchie, who was cordial, who wasn't standoffish, but you could tell that he was not like when I first met Ozzy, who was just completely
Open
welcome.
arms. Yeah.
And but it was great to go backstage, and I have a photo of this Ozzy's dressing room with all these guitars lined around the wall and on the table, and on one of, and so they placed me not on stage next to Ritchie, but I was between Ritchie and the barricade, so I was right in between where the security people.
Wow.
And on one show, on one of the guitar smashes, he threw the guitar over me, and his cord went right over my shoulder.
Oh my God! Wow.
I still have the cord. So, but so Mark was highly respected in the industry, and so '78. I think we all know what happened with the Never Say Die tour with Van Halen,
Yeah.
and how, yeah, they probably got upstaged there quite a bit, and things were changing. And but Phil, you know, when Ozzy left or was fired,
Yeah.
you know, he was supposedly holed up in a hotel for 3 months, eating pizza and drugs and wondering what he was going to do for his life. And I've never held firm to those reports, because Ozzy in that hotel room in 1975 told me with confidence that he was going to have a solo career. And to have that person be advertised to have hit rock bottom, I mean, I don't, maybe drugs will do that to you, but all the times that I saw Ozzy in the middle of the afternoon, he was fine. There was no partying that I witnessed. And, you know, in the 90s, VH1 had this series called Behind the Music.
Yeah.
And
I remember that.
it seemed like the theme was always band makes it big against all odds. Band gets into drug use and hits bottom, and then band recovers. And it seemed to be that way with Ozzy's documentary Behind the Music. And I don't know whether they do that to make it dramatic, you know, for
Could
the
be.
show. I think maybe Ozzy was not as bad off as people, as they said. I guess the band.
Did you continue to follow Sabbath then, or did you, because of your
Well,
connection to Ozzy, did you also follow him as well?
both at a
Both.
more limited, you know, by the 80s, I was in my 30s, you know, and I was in a career, and things were kind of moving on for me too. But I kept the connections. And for example, in Mob Rules
Yeah.
tour, I was able to, that's where I was able to see Dio a little bit. And then and and even in that tour, after one show, Mark said, "Hey, Terry is backing your suggestion for their new live album." I think I told you this on one of my first communications.
Yeah.
I knew that Sabbath had all these bootleg live albums, so I
Yeah.
said, you should name it Legally Live." And Geezer, Terry Butler, Mark called me up and said, "Hey, we're out here in San Francisco. Geezer wants to name it that. He's backing your
Yeah.
idea."
Suggestion. Wow.
They went with Live Eagle, but those are little things that just I cherish as something that you just don't come along with every day. And so and then for Ozzy, this was quite a moment. I 1982 March, Ozzy is playing, you know, he's solo now,
Yeah.
and he's playing in Atlanta, Georgia, and I go to meet him. I go to the lobby of the Omni Hotel early afternoon of the show, and I do the same thing. I go to the desk and I drop Mark Forster's name, and here comes Sharon Osbourne
Oh.
and Randy Rhoads down to meet me. "Oh, how do you know Mark? And how do you know about it? Nice to meet you," and all this. but Sharon says, Ozzy's doing a radio bit. He's not even here. But I'll tell him you came by.
Yeah, yeah.
Sharon turns and walks away and leaves Randy standing there with me. Like, and so Randy says, you want to go get some lunch? And so I go to a little kind of a bar cafe there in the hotel, and the sweetest man you'll ever meet or would have ever met. He doesn't even want to talk about himself. He just wants to know about me and how I met Mark and my story with Black Sabbath, which I'm kind of telling you now, and I'm telling him over lunch. And 2 days later is when he died.
Oh, wow, gosh.
2 days later. So I saw his last show at the Omni that night. So
that must have felt surreal for you at that age. The fact you've gone out to lunch with Randy Rhoads, and he's a really nice guy, and you've watched him live that night, and then literally 2 days later you find out he's gone.
Shocking. I couldn't believe it. Wanted to know answers, like who was doing what that shouldn't have been done. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. So to kind of tie things up a little bit, Phil, so the rest of the 80s, Mark, I think, is starting to, I didn't keep in touch with Sabbath in all their incarnations through the 80s and 90s. I was one of those, Ozzy and Sabbath that's kind of like, as you can see, why I would be more biased toward those years. So, but I did see Ozzy. The last time I ever saw him was in his dressing room at the Fox Theater in Atlanta in the 88 or 89. And by then his assistant was a guy named Tony Dennis. He would be like what Frank Sylvani was in the 70s with Ozzy. And again, all I had to do was get in touch with Tony at a outside stage door and say, I'm a friend of Mark Forster. That's all it took. And Tony got me a VIP pass, and he said, let me bring you in to say hello to Ozzy. And he brought me right into Ozzy's dressing room. And by 88, 89, I could already tell Ozzy was shaking. His hands were shaking, whether it was just medication or the early onset of the Parkinson's, that early. I could tell that he was just, not what he used to be. And Ozzy asked me how Mark was doing. And, I hadn't seen him since he left Sabbath. It had been that over 10 years. And that was it. Mark Forster passed away 2 years later. And since then, I really haven't had direct contact with the band. The closest would be 3 years ago is when I contacted Tony Iommi's manager, told him my story. And that's when he said, Tony is redoing his website.
Yeah.
He's interested in what you're showing me to archive it, possibly some of it for his new website. And after the show this Saturday, if you find yourself in England, we'd like to meet you, bring your book. He wanted me to mail this to him. Everything I have is in this book.
Yeah.
And I told him, I said, I told my wife that if the house ever caught on fire, this is the first thing I'm going for.
Yeah.
Is this scrapbook.
Yeah.
So I wasn't going to mail this to them. And so, but he knows that when I'm there, if we can coordinate a time, whether it's just him or him and Tony, that the three of us hopefully will meet after 55 years. So, then that's my story, Phil. I do have one other little thing. In 1999, Ozzy had a behind the music with VH1. And halfway through that, I'm watching it. Halfway through, they showed a collage of still photos of Ozzy. One was him clapping, and well, that was my photo that I had given him in '75 that he had
Wow.
kept all through all those years, through all
You kept that
those
one.
turbulent times that he had. I mean, where maybe he had them in an envelope where he lived or something, but so he used those for that documentary. And then um, as as I sent you, this is the black and white photo that I took in '72,
Yeah.
which is on their website right now in the history section.
Yeah. Yeah.
So so they have held on to a few things of mine that have survived, um and yeah, I'm sorry I
No,
kind
no.
of dominated.
In that scrapbook, are there specific things in there that really, I mean, obviously, as you said, if your house is on fire, that's what you'd run out with. But is there any, like, if you had to think of the top five things that are in that book that are the most special or bring back the most special memories that might, like, to me or someone else watching this, they might think, well, that's a nice picture. But are there certain things in there where you think that's like a really key moment in my Sabbath story?
Well, I think the number one thing that I would want to keep is the index card where Ozzy wrote out his
Yeah.
address and phone number. That would be at the top of the list. And I'm going to go to England for the first time sooner than later, and we're going to do a little. A friend of mine, a travel friend, and I'm going to go by Bulrush Cottage, like many other people have done, because Ozzy invited me in
Yeah.
1975, and he doesn't live there anymore. But
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, it's kind of that. I did call him on his birthday that same year that I met him there. So the phone number was real; it was legitimate,
Yeah.
and and so there are other things. The photo of him that he signed, Ozzy Osbourne, thanks Pat, a great photo. I think I can show you that one right here.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Osbourne, thanks.
Brilliant.
Here's the index card of his address.
Yeah. Fantastic.
And so mainly it's photographs or something written by the band. I have many letters from Mark Forrester, like the letter that he hand wrote, saying that they got Ozzy back in the band. Don't worry, And
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe you showed me that one. Yeah.
that was a moment that was important. Um, and so yeah, there's a lot of
So,
little stuff that to other people might not be that valuable. But I've had people, friends of my wife, who have heard about this, and they're not even our age, and they're like, I've got to see that, and they're in a little bit of disbelief. So Ozzy's solo career has brought generations, along with him, because he actually for a time was more famous as a solo artist, but now I think the focus is back on those original members. And to this day, I say that Sabotage album and Ozzy's vocal ability in that album, that was the peak, and nobody sang quite like that.
yeah,
Um,
that's,
in
yeah,
this,
because I always think, because what are my favorite Black Sabbath albums? And I understand the importance of the first one especially, and then obviously Paranoid. But I think Sabbath Bloody Sabbath is probably it's that one and Sabotage are my favorite, and they kind of swap places. But I think Sabotage probably edges forwards at the moment, because when you listen to Hole in the Sky, I mean his vocals on that are so appear. I mean, you can see why. I mean, this is a question I guess to ask, is that when Sabbath carried on and they did the reunion tours, anything from Sabotage is basically dropped because he couldn't quite reach the vocal range of that. I mean, you saw them on that tour. Um, was Ozzy able to sing those
Yes,
songs with ease at that time?
yes, and well, there's a performance that's recorded of him doing Megalomania from Asbury Park, New Jersey,
Yeah, I've got a
19.
bootleg of that. Yeah, yeah.
Everybody should go on YouTube and check that out. Megalomania, Asbury Park, 75, and Ozzy is as good, if not better, than the studio version. And so he was peaking there. By Never Say Die, you know, even Robert Plant burned out his voice pretty
Yeah, very
early
true.
on. You just can't do that for year after year like that, and not have some kind of effect happen. Um, and so, yeah, it's a bell curve, I think, for most musicians, unless you keep yourself um, at the top of your game,
Yeah, yeah.
physically. Um, And yeah, and I've really enjoyed your Black Sabbath, especially the compilation video you did recently, where
Yeah,
you got to put your own album together. What songs would you put together? That was
and I know that was really tough, and people were saying, "Well, can't we have a double album, or can't we have?" But I thought, no, I'll keep it really strict. It's got to be 10 tracks, and I think it is difficult. And I'm going to do another one soon called 10 really deep cuts from the Sabbath catalogue, but no, as an alternative. But I do think I agree with you that the music from these. Someone that likes all Black Sabbath lineups, but I have to say, maybe it's because we're heading towards this big extravaganza in the UK. I have felt myself really focus on the Ozzy years. Never Say Die is still my least favourite Sabbath album. I mean, one of them's got to be at the bottom. But the one that I like, Sabotage, obviously, Sabotage and Bloody Sabbath are my favourites. Technical Ecstasy I like, but the one that I play the most at the moment is Volume 4. This There's
yes.
just something about that. There's a lot. There's always the other thing about Black Sabbath is it's heavy metal, but there's a lot of light and shade on Sabbath albums. There's a lot of different textures and different types of music.
And it's being discovered more and more as the years go by. And in the comments, I like reading comments on YouTube on a certain track that's featured, and I just love when I know it's a young person who is
Yeah,
my
yeah,
age, who is connected with that music 55 years later, and here they are feeling the same thing that I felt. And that's when this will be listened to for 50 more years. No matter what AI does, this is still going to endure. And
yeah, totally. I totally agree. It's been fantastic talking to you, Pat, and thank you for sharing your Black Sabbath story. I think it's a unique story. There are many people around the world of our age group and decades younger who love Black Sabbath and know all the albums. But I think for your story and how you met them and were able to meet up with them and become literally friends with them for that period of time and see them from the stage from so many different aspects. It's unique, and it must you're very lucky, and you have a unique insight into this band that still brings, as you say, so much joy to hundreds of thousands of people around the world.
thank you, Phil. I never take it for granted, and I appreciate the time spent with you
That's
here
okay.
today.
Well, yeah, well, take care, Pat, and we'll talk online. But it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. So
Thank you.
take care. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Well, how cool was that? That's Pat Renau. Pat is a subscriber to Now Spinning Magazine, and we've been talking for well over a year about Black Sabbath. He's a huge Deep Purple fan, Uriah Heep fan, but it's the Sabbath side. And Pat started telling me about how he not only went to some of the gigs, but actually met Ozzy. And I thought, well, this is such an interesting story. I just thought it'd be really worth inviting Pat onto the podcast to tell that story, because it's amazing. It's kind of like, well, the film Almost Famous, and the Cameron kind of goes backstage, his mom drops him off, and Black Sabbath are on in the distance, and only just by circumstance, by luck, you bump into people. And I think this story of, taking a few photographs and then ending up saying, oh, can you go into a hotel, and driving 600 odd miles? That is like me in Cornwall in the UK driving to Edinburgh. We'd never do that. Driving 6 hours and getting somewhere and going up to the counter of the hotel and saying, can you tell me which room Ozzy Osbourne's in, please? And they go, yeah, it's number, 1303, whatever it was. And then going up and then finding out, oh, yeah, he's in the cafe. And you go down to the cafe and say, all right. And then ask you, oh, do you want to join me for lunch? And then, oh, do you want to come to the gig? Oh, this is the manager. Would you like to go? Just whatever gig you want to come to, we'll look after you. And doing that from 1975. That's Sabotage tour, Technical Ecstasy tour, Never Say Die, and also in 75, talking to Ozzy and Ozzy saying, no, whatever happens with Sabbath, I'm going to have my own solo career, and I've got a name for it, Blizzard of Oz. Amazing, absolutely amazing. So thank you, Pat, for sharing those stories with us. They're absolutely incredible. It's really heartwarming to have stories like that, for many of us who are Black Sabbath fans. So thank you for watching and listening. And remember, music is the healer and the doctor. I bet we're all going to play some Sabbath now, aren't we? Hey, what are you going to play? Let me know in the comments. So thank you very much. Remember, please subscribe to the podcast, to the YouTube channel. Visit the website at nowspinning.co.uk. If you become a patron or YouTube member, you can also join the private Facebook group, the WhatsApp groups, and come along to our virtual pub called the Now Spinning Arms, which meets twice a month. Keep spinning those discs. Take care, all of you, and I'll see you very, very soon.